we talk about the future and what it means for AV programmers. So if you have ever had a glancing thought about ChatGPT, AI, the future of control system programming, be sure to check this one out. This is A State of Control, episode 126, Skill Up and Branch Out. This is A State of Control. As you may notice, I'm not Steve Greenblatt. It's Uncle Richie here, our good friend and host. Steve Greenblatt is a little under the weather, so I am stepping up and pinch hitting and taking the moderator duties for Steve. Steve, hope you feel better. We're recording episode 126, so I'm sure by the time we get to 127, we'll see his smiling face. But for now, you've got me, and even better, you've got two great guests joining who are longtime friends and contributors to the show on more than one occasion. One I haven't seen in quite some time, one we saw recently. It is Patrick Murray. Patrick is coming from us from Catch Technologies, the principal of Catch Technologies. Patrick, welcome back.
Thanks, Rich. Good to see you again.
You too. Lots of things to talk about, and I'm sure lots of things that you'll be keeping us updated on what's been happening with
Much
you.
has changed. Yeah.
What's just changed. And my good friend, Nick Miller from the Pacific Northwest and other parts unknown. And as we say, his daytime identity will not be revealed on this show. But it is always great to have Nick here. Nick, good to see you. How you doing, buddy?
Greetings. Thanks for having me. One quick disclaimer, all opinions are my own.
Got that one out of the way. All right, so I'm just going to jump right into this. One of the interesting things about the control system industry is that there was a period of time for a couple of decades that we were locked into a certain way of doing things. And there was a certain number of companies who allowed us to do things. And typically, if your name didn't end in Tron or had a couple of letters in there, those were your only choices. And we were kind of bound by the technology at the time. And today's episode is a little bit about the future, and the future of AV programming, which is something that I'm glad to have Nick and Patrick here because I like to think that they saw this coming way before we were even talking about it. And I know Patrick, in his instances, has actually taken action and was a great prognosticator of what was to come. So I'm going to start with this, which is, Patrick, what do you think is the role of AV programmers now?
That is a really interesting question. And I think it's really interesting the way you talked about the old way of doing things, how we were bound to certain control system manufacturers. But now, I almost feel like there was more freedom back then, because as a programmer, you were just given a bunch of stuff and a directive to make something work, and you had all the tools you needed to do whatever you wanted. And now it's a bit more restrictive in some areas, where if you have to integrate with something that doesn't want to be integrated with, like some kind of sound bar that controls a video conference meeting or something like that, if you can't integrate with that USB protocol, you just can't do anything anymore. So in some respects, yes. I mean, we have a touch screen in our pockets now, which was crazy to think about 20 years ago. But the popular technologies now are much more restrictive. And in Resi and commercial, it's kind of the same thing. In Resi, you have these smart home applications, and there are ways to integrate with them, but there's a lot more hoops to jump through than there used to be, where you just had a bunch of equipment. It was all on your desk or on your workbench, and you typed away and got it all working together. So I think that's one of the big challenges nowadays is squaring that, because there still may be the expectation that you're just going to be the guy who makes it all work. And sometimes you could run into these roadblocks where popular technologies won't let you in.
So Nick, you've been around as long as I have at this point. I'm going to phrase this part with you. I'm going to throw the same question to you, but not only that, but as somebody who started when we were just handed a bunch of boxes and thrown on a table and told to make it work. Where did you see the shift happening for you as well from when we started as the traditional AV programmer? And, as part of it is saying, there's people who come new and they don't know what to expect. And then there's a lot of people who've been doing it for lots and lots of years and going, now what? Where does all of that come together if, say, somebody does have some experience?
Yeah, I kind of saw the shift coming when the real meat of the AV and networking convergence happening. So as soon as our devices left the infrared relay RS-232 control scenario and went purely network, you started seeing this shift of other players getting involved in our world, where previously we were left alone to do our own thing, work our own magic, perform our voodoo to make systems work. Whereas now you have network administrators, InfoSec requirements, certification, security certifications, all of these things coming into play in our world that didn't exist previously. So there's a lot more knowledge sharing with other entities that we have to do proactively in order to effectively perform our job, and that comes in many different forms. It's a lot more time documenting, building trust, and sharing information than before, where we were just the cowboys coming in, gunslinging up at the keyboard and making things work.
So, Patrick, I'm going to turn to you because, again, I kind of alluded to early on, you saw some differences just like Nick did. Talk a little bit about how you shifted from being a traditional AV programmer. And we were just talking earlier before the show started that you're like, people were asking me questions about, the old ways and the walled gardens of programming, and I didn't even have an answer for them. Talk a little bit about your journey and kind of the transformation that you went through really over this period when, like Nick was talking about, when the network became the system. What did you see and what prompted you moving in that direction?
With those old technologies, relays and serial and things like that, I view that as it was a closed network. So that's why we could do whatever we wanted. We weren't cowboys. We were still professionals, doing the right thing. But the network was closed. So there was no question of trust. There was just a serial cable that went from point A to point B. There was no real way to get in the middle of that. So I think that's an interesting distinction that, like, we were on a closed network and now we need to open up. We're on a shared pipe with all sorts of other things going on there. But as far as like how I got into using new programming technologies, it was because Crestron, you started using C#. That was the initial push to, I guess I'm not just an AV programmer. We can, or are expected to, learn these new technologies. And once I started getting that working, then I was in that world of being on Stack Overflow all the time and talking with, being in a bigger community of programmers than just the AV world, and just started experimenting with other things. And I made an iOS app that could control a projector and a switcher, and that was it. I was off to the races after that, because it's like, I could get this stuff. That the real exciting part was when I had it working on a laptop without having to compile, upload, and reboot a processor. That was where the light went off. It was like, wow, this could be much, as far as development goes, much more efficient as far as testing and getting things working. And from there, it was basically just the idea was like, how much of this extra stuff can we get out of the way? And that landed me on HTML and JavaScript as being like the most bare bones way of serving some kind of user interface and opening sockets to control equipment on the network.
So Nick, we'll switch gears a little bit on this one. So let's talk about the fact that, we're going away from a traditional processor and being landlocked, and we're moving into kind of real-time systems, cloud systems. How does that play into, where your programming focus goes?
The cloud has introduced a lot, opened a lot of doors for us, in particular in the MSP space. So control system programmers, if we use our previous reference point of 20 years ago, would get a system specification, show up to the job site, or do some pre-programming, show up, deploy, debug, close the laptop, walk away, and come back for a service call if need be, or whatever the case may be. If there service calls after the fact could come up, but now we're in a world where the job doesn't necessarily end when the project is deployed. With ongoing managed services, a control system programmer's role is to meet the initial scope and leverage the available tools to allow ongoing maintenance on a 24/7 basis. The cloud systems enable that by allowing one vendor, whether it be an integrator or a separate managed services provider, to gather information at a scale that can be completely global, which was unheard of before. And so now you're able to proactively manage and monitor systems as part of the control programming, so that at the university level, at a medical facility, whatever the case may be, any AV technician can proactively respond to issues before a user finds it and says, "Hey, my conference room doesn't work."
So Patrick, kind of the same thing to you is now that we've moved away from the traditional, where do you see how cloud and again, we use software as a service, do you feel that that's where things are moving? What are your thoughts and, kind of Nick's take on it?
I think it's kind of hard to make a blanket statement about any of this stuff. And I really picture it from the same lens of 20 years ago, where just make it work. Here's the ingredients. Every project is going to start with some kind of a description, some kind of a goal. This is what should happen when your job is done. And based on that, you choose the right technologies to accomplish the thing. So maybe that is a traditional control system. Maybe the cloud does need to be involved. Like some of the things, like you can't do remote support without some kind of a internet connection happening. And of course, the more versed you are on these different technologies, the more likely you are to choose the right ones and use them in the right way to get the job done. So that's how I see it. It's just what ingredients am I going to cook with today?
That brings up one good point. It is choosing the appropriate technologies. Our section of the industry is kind of headed in two different directions at the same time. On one side of things, we are moving towards standard programming languages and libraries, Python, JavaScript, etc. On the other hand, we have manufacturers that are building silos and partnerships within each other, where we may not get direct access to an API without some sort of partnership agreement or matching product A with product B, where the two manufacturers have a defined relationship. Previously, we were looking at protocol and API documentation. Now we have to take into consideration what works with what and who's playing in whose sandbox.
So let's take this. When we talked a little bit about, if you're experienced and you were used to how it was, and you're kind of teaching the old dog new tricks on this one, and kind of bringing in new information and amassing it. But Patrick, let's say you've got a newer programmer and coming in. What are you going to advise them in terms of, like, Nick talked about, hey, Python's part of there. You talked about C#. Like if somebody was coming in and, they've maybe come out of with a computer science degree, maybe they haven't. Maybe they've been a technician or a PM or somebody who's worked their way up and they're taking the next step in their career. If you had the opportunity to sit them down for the 45 seconds of, I'm going to impart this knowledge on you, what would you tell a new programmer who says, yes, this control system stuff, I love it. How?
It would be heavily dependent on what my business focus was. So am I in resi or commercial, higher ed? I think that all plays a big part in what technologies are used. But all of that aside, let's just take the hypothetical general use case. The first thing I would do is I would probably have them play with Node-RED. I would give them a few pieces of equipment and say, make a user interface that turns that display on and off over the network, just to get their feet wet and see something happen in real life. And from there, I would say, okay, now do it with only using function blocks. So where they would actually have to type in the code that does something. And these are all like baby steps. So Node-RED is kind of a WYSIWYG programming environment where it opens up network connections and you can send commands and create a quick user interface and connect all those things together. So I think that would be like the entry point, just to have early wins and see that things work and start building this idea of, how the systems actually work. So, when I used to work for Steve a very long time ago, and one of the first things he told me was, like, programming is less than half of the job. A big part of the job is communicating with the customer, figuring out the job site, making sure everything works. But probably the most important part is understanding the requirements and how the system itself functions. So I think that something like Node-RED really helps people get their head around, a user interface, I touch the button, and then the screen goes on, and then this happens, and just to get that basis of a concept of the design. And then from there, just baby step your way into writing the whole program in an IDE with just text and making that work. I think that's how I would go about it.
All right. So, if you've got Uncle Nick's fireside chat, what are you pointing out as, and again, and I'll lead into this right now. It's like, what are you learning now? But I'll also dovetail in, where you see things in the next 5, maybe 10 years and how that plays into the conversation you're going to have with somebody who's looking to expand their skill set.
2 key points I would give is skill up and branch out. So skilling up is, as Patrick mentioned, just get your feet wet in different platforms, different languages. One of the greatest things to happen in our world recently is all of the different generative AIs. Take your pick, choose your flavor, and just start giving it prompts and challenge it based on what you already know, and see what kind of responses you get and how you can leverage those tools that are available to continue your development, whether it be taking what you know from a particular language, if you're a Python guy or a JavaScript guy or a C# guy, translate that into one of the other languages that you may not be as well skilled in. And just kind of build your reputation or repertoire of different platforms and different languages that you have in your tool chest. Secondly, branching out. Control system programming is a continuous evolving part of the AV industry. There are other aspects of the AV industry and greater software development industry where our strengths as traditional or even new control system programmers can be applied. First thing that comes to mind is digital signage. There's a lot of automation, scripting, content management that happens within the digital signage world that a lot of programmers may or may not have considered or worked on previously. So just finding other areas and niches of the kind of tangent areas of AV and technology in general are going to be big assets moving forward for the next 5 to 10 years.
Same thing, 5 years looking ahead in the future. You've talked to them about, hey, here are the things to know. And Nick brought up a good point. Where does AI play in this? How do you see AI playing in this in terms of the roadmap? And what you were just talking about, like Node-RED, great, start with there. But also laying the groundwork for, and here's what's on the horizon, and prepare yourself for these things. Where do you see that leading?
It's tough to answer from a programmer's perspective purely because the market will always drive what work is available, what needs to be done, what technologies are being used. So I think that's the CEO crystal ball thing of what direction are we going to choose to head in, even though we can never know where really things are going to go. Um, so, like what Nick was saying, yes, become a polyglot, at least a little, dabble. Put some time in your schedule every month to just try something new. Because what that does is it's not necessarily about gaining the skills in a particularly new language, but I really feel like it helps you think in different ways. So if you have a problem in C sharp, your brain is going to work differently when you try to execute that problem in JavaScript. It's just going to be different. And I feel like that just makes you a stronger programmer when you do these little mental exercises of trying out different programming languages. And as far as AI, if you're not using it, start using it. And I like the way it is today, and hopefully it stays this way. It can't write a whole program well. It can't interpret what somebody needs well, but it can give you a function. So the way I vision it, like the way it is today, it's a search engine basically. And instead of going through 10 Stack Overflow posts, it just gives me the answer. And just like Stack Overflow, it might be right, it might be wrong. Probably because it got the data from those Stack Overflow posts. But it gives you the answer and it gives you code, and you could ask it questions like, why did you do it this way? Why did you do it that way? And it's just a great resource to kind of free up your minds from the minutia of a programming language and spend more time on the bigger design. So how do I write a for loop? If you just forget it because you haven't done it in 5 years, use the AI. Give me an example of a for loop, copy it over, and get to work and get back to your bigger thinking. I think that's currently today the biggest strength of AI is being an assistant.
Nick, I mean, at this point, do you think that it's going to be it should be a necessary part of your tool belt? And following up with that, along with AI, if you had to say, hey, if you got X amount of time and you're going to skill up, look at these, focus on these. Where would you put your greatest hits in terms of spending your brain time and how AI plays into that?
Yeah, if you want to be efficient, you want to be effective in your work, absolutely use AI. It has become one my primary starting point on any project. Just laying out based on my prior knowledge within the industry and based on the scope of work at hand. uh, I will always prompt some sort of generative AI. Here's what I have. Here's what I want. Give me at least a framework, and that's my starting point. Is it going to create the program for me? Absolutely not. But it will lay the foundation and save me hours of time in doing so, in especially in the boilerplate portions of our role. So learning, playing with the generative AI tools that are out there, finding the one that works best for your prompting style, writing style, what output is most efficient for you. That's all. That's all going to be on an individual basis. But leveraging those tools to give you a starting point that you then flesh out from the 40%, 50% point on just makes you a more effective programmer. So yeah, just like we talked about learning different languages, gaining experience with different generative AI tools, and especially because they evolve so quickly these days, is massively important.
How do we feel that, we talk about the programmers themselves? What role do the control system manufacturers, what role should they be playing in this? What role, do you think they should be playing in this at this point? Where do you think they are?
As far as control systems in 2025, you have your traditional control systems. We all know what that means on this show. But what I see happening now is there are other control systems in the room. Zoom is a control system. Teams is a control system. Apple Home, Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, those are control systems in the Resi space. They do what we used to spend a lot of time coding up. A lot of them are very capable. And at times it seems odd to have a control system next to another control system, and it winds up just being a bridge so that you could do something with control system A. You got to go through control system B to get there, because that kind of opened the doors for you because of the partnerships that Nick was talking about earlier. Is that their role? Do our traditional control systems really just become hubs to let us control these other more popular platforms? I don't know. It can be used that way, and that kind of gets back to my earlier point: is what technologies do I have to work with to achieve a certain goal? I think for the time being, your traditional control systems will always have that kind of a role to play, kind of enabling some kind of niche solution that a video conference system didn't think of, or didn't expose in their API.
So what do you think an AV control system is going to look like in 2030?
I wanted to say it'll be an app on your computer or phone, but it'll probably be in your glasses. We can't imagine, and we're only talking about 5 years. It's going to be unimaginable from today. Like 10 years ago, we might have kind of figured out, like if we go back into a state of control, we probably predicted a few things that are available today. I don't think we could do that anymore.
Nick, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I kind of feel like control system programming is being turned on its head. Previously and traditionally, going back to our 20-year benchmark, it was a top-down kind of platform where the top dog was the control system. It talked down to the various endpoints and through the layers and said, "Hey, you guys do this. Display turn on. Switch to this input. Matrix router. Switch this input to this output. Audio DSP. Set this level, etc." It's kind of inverted with all of the different technologies that are available today, where you have endpoints kind of dictating what they do and having their own interfaces and their own experiences, to where the control system now needs to react when a Teams call starts. Hey, set the lights to a specific preset. You're reacting to actions that some of these subsystems, as Patrick was talking about, have performed, and saying, hey, this did that, so now you need to go do this. That's really the model that control systems are headed in. Whereas before, we sat down and said, when user presses button A, perform actions 1, 2, and 3. And that's just not the case anymore today or moving forward.
Well, I think that's probably the best way to tie things up for this show, where we wind up sometimes more questions coming out than answers, and leading in probably into another new discussion for a future show. Always interesting information, guys. Again, like I said, it's been interesting because, again, knowing both of your careers, it's been fun to watch 10 years later that what you were talking about 10 years before, as Patrick said, is, hey, yeah, it's starting to happen. And I know from our side, we're still looking at it going, yeah, that 5-year benchmark, it's like, well, let me get through the next year, and then we'll figure out 5 from there. But I do know that I've got you here now. And so, Patrick, if our viewers wanted to get a hold of you or ask more information or peer into your crystal ball, how can we find you?
Just go to LinkedIn, look for Patrick Murray. You'll find me there. Or there's a contact form at catchtechnologies.com.
And Nick, if they want to find you in parts unknown, or at least geolocate you, how can our viewers find you?
Can also find me on LinkedIn at the most generic name of all time, Nick Miller. Or you can hunt me down on any of the social media platforms at Nick Mill.
Well, I hope that you find them there. If by chance you do want to find Uncle Richie, you can find me on the social media platforms at Fregosa. You can find the company Fregosa Design, but hopefully, and most importantly, you're going to find many of us here at AVNation.tv, obviously here at A State of Control with my partner Steve, but we've got tons and tons of shows serving the AV verticals, all the way up from our AV Week and our Resi Week and, our social and everything else. We really hope that you do find your way there. But with that is the end of our episode here, and we hope to see you on the next one. This is Uncle Richie, Rich Fregosa, for A State of Control.
the network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
This is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.